Hey there folks, Rel here. We are finally going to re-review the T-7 Mini-Chaingun, which has been neglected for a long time. It still may not be what most people wanted, but the recent changes have taken it from being, quite frankly, one of the most useless, albeit entertaining weapons in the game, to something that's actually competitive as well as entertaining. That said, the T-7 Mini-Chaingun is a heavy weapon specific to the Terran Republic, and it's usable only by the Heavy Assault class. It'll run you 1000 certs or 700 station cash to unlock, and the Mini-Chaingun has access to only 4 attachments in total, and 3 of them greatly impact the weapon's performance, so we'll break them down up front. The standard laser sight is going to tighten up your hipfire cone of fire a great deal, the extended magazines is going to double your magazine size, a dark light flashlight is pretty much pointless on this weapon, and the Ballistic Rapid Refire trigger is a new attachment that increases the weapon's maximum rate of fire and gives it a faster spin-up time. The T-7 Mini-Chaingun deals 143 damage up to 10 meters, and then tapers off to 112 damage at 60 meters. This is your standard carbine damage profile, and it drops off 2 damage tiers over its fall-off distance. That means that the T-7 will kill an enemy in 7 shots up to 10 meters, 8 shots up to 40 meters, and 9 shots anywhere past the 40 meter mark. It's also worth noting that headshots from the T-7 only have a 1.5 times damage multiplier, opposed to the 2 times bonus that most weapons offer. So if you're working within your 10 meter maximum damage range, your 143 damage per round will jump up to only 214.5. So mathematically, start to finish, that would normally be 4 headshots and a body shot. By comparison, your standard 143 damage carbine with a 2 headshot multiplier is only 3 headshots and a body shot, but of that 214.5 damage, the 0.5 seems to get rounded down. So instead of 4 headshots and a body shot being a kill, it'll actually leave your target alive with just the slightest sliver of health. Whether this is a bug or not, I don't know, but the point of what I'm trying to get at is that going specifically for headshots with this weapon is far more trouble than it's worth, and that's something that will hopefully become more evident when we talk about the weapon's cone of fire. The T-7 Mini-Chaingun has a spin-up time, meaning that the rate of fire starts out lower, and then it ramps up to its maximum over the course of a second or two. The exact numbers are a bit difficult for me to determine. I tried breaking down some test footage in 60 frames per second, but my game was only hovering around 50 frames per second, so there are some discrepancies to work out. So instead of speculating, here's a chart that shows the amount of shots leaving the barrel at 0.5 second intervals. When you're looking at the chart, the Ballistic Refire doesn't seem very impressive. It's only ahead of the standard MCG by a single shot at the early stages, and then maybe a few shots later on. But that single extra shot turns out to be a make or break in a lot of situations. And that's just talking about when you're fighting somebody one-on-one. If you've already circumvented the weapon's downside by pre-firing before you round a corner, then you're just basically left with a faster firing weapon that is going to drop your targets more quickly. The Ballistic Refire trigger is also going to give you substantially more kill potential outside of the weapon's desired range. And the reason for that is basically because enemies who are farther away from you can run more easily. So the more quickly you can send bullets downrange, the less time that they're going to have to react. So to sum it up again, the Ballistic Refire makes your weapon more competitive in close quarters as well as at range. Basically it just makes the weapon better all around, but the catch is that you'll be sacrificing your extended magazines for that increased rate of fire, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later. Once the T-7 Mini-Chaingun gets past its initial spin-up, it's going to fire off bullets at a constant 800 rounds per minute, or 13.33 rounds per second. When you have the Ballistic Rapid Refire trigger attached, it'll jump up to around 844 or 845 rounds per minute, or about 14 rounds per second. It's also worth mentioning that according to the patch notes, the pre-spool rate of fire, so the rate of fire baseline before the weapon starts spinning up, was given a small increase. Now I don't know what the numbers used to be, I don't know what they are now, but the weapon does feel better than it used to in a lot of different respects, and I think this has a hand in that. By default, the T-7 Mini-Chaingun has 100 rounds per magazine and 300 in reserve. That sounds like a good amount of ammo, but this weapon will chew through it faster than any other weapon in the game. If you equip extended magazines, you're going to jump to 200 rounds per magazine and 200 in reserve. As a side note, the ammo belt suit slot gives you an extra magazine's worth of ammo per rank. So that's an extra 200 rounds per rank if you're running extended magazines, or an extra 100 rounds per rank by default. Again, ammo draw is a big deal for this weapon, so running an ammo belt is not a bad idea if you oftentimes find yourself without an engineer. Regarding that, the T-7 restores ammo from an NG's ammo pack at a rate of 50 per second, or maybe 50 per 1.5 seconds. Either way, that's a pretty fast rate to replenish your ammo at, so engineers are a minigunner's best friend. Probably the most notable downside to the T-7 is that it has an incredibly long reload time, which is 4.39 seconds short and 5.39 seconds long. Regardless of whether or not you empty the entire magazine, understand that 4+ seconds of downtime is long. In the heat of combat, it's very, very long. This impact is made even worse knowing how quickly we can dump an entire magazine, which is about 7.6 seconds without extended mags, 7.1 seconds with a ballistic refire trigger, and about 15.07 seconds with extended mags. So the numerical overlap is huge when it comes to time spent reloading versus time spent shooting, and it makes having extended magazines that much more important. In fact, if you are running a ballistic refire trigger, you are knowingly emphasizing the weapon's downsides in exchange for the increase in damage output. Faster ammo draw means more time reloading, which means more downtime, which means more dead time if you get caught out. It would really make sense to me if they just gave this weapon about 125 rounds per magazine by default, or reduce the reload time by about half a second on either side, in situations where the battle is more fluid instead of the type of fight where you can just sit at the top of a staircase and hold down the trigger. Don't be surprised if you spend more time reloading the weapon than you actually do fighting. That said, let's talk about accuracy. The recoil on the T-7 is negligible. You're still going to feel it, it recoils up and then has left and right shake, but since the weapon isn't accurate to begin with, the recoil really isn't a big deal. What is a big deal is the weapon's cone of fire. As of last patch, the cone of fire while aiming down sights has been made stagnant, meaning that it doesn't expand, it doesn't contract, even while moving it just is what it is. If you look at the forums, a lot of people are viewing this as a nerf, and they're technically correct. The iteration of the weapon before this one used to start out very accurate, and then it would expand its cone of fire over the course of about 50 rounds fired. However, the weapon overall was worse. The old MCG spin-up time was slower, the headshot multiplier was still 1.5 times, so while the weapon was certainly more accurate, at least at the start, the benefits of that accuracy didn't do anything to make the weapon more competitive at ranges where it mattered. Most importantly though is that the old aim down sights cone of fire is worse than the new one, and it was affected by movement states. You can see the difference here in the image on the left. The change is pretty significant. The new, smaller ADS cone makes the weapon much better at sustained fire within about 20 meters, which helps define its intended role, and that previously wasn't the case. That said, the weapon's HIPFIRE cone of fire did receive a very noticeable buff. The HIPFIRE cone of fire will bloom only a few shots before reaching its maximum bloom, which is about the size of the reload circle. Again, this change moves the chain gun more toward being a mobile, close-quarters powerhouse, the one that it should be, rather than being a weapon that was only meant to be used while aiming down sights. Now, given that each cone of fire has a very specific size, you can define some pretty easy parameters for when hipfire and ADS accuracy will start to taper off. For hipfire, you can hold a reasonable moving cone of fire on a target up to about 5 meters away, and this is workable up until about the 10-meter mark. For aiming down sights, you can land perfect shots on targets up to about 12 meters, and it's workable up to around 20 meters. Beyond that 20-meter mark, the weapon loses a lot of its gusto, but the ballistic refire trigger attachment will help pick up the slack. An interesting trait of the MCG's aim down sights is that if you aim down sights, your hipfire cone of fire gets reset almost instantly. This was much more important back when the hipfire cone of fire was absolutely terrible, but it may still have some merit in the weapon's current iteration. This functionality is actually more synergetic with the laser sight attachment because, as it stands currently, an equipped laser sight can actually give you better accuracy on your hipfire than you would get from aiming down sights in certain movement states, at least for a few shots. As good as that might sound though, running a laser sight on your MCG is probably not the best option. And it's sad because I actually like the laser sight, I really do, but with the introduction of the ballistic refire trigger, the opportunity cost is just way too high. That said, let's break down the attachment suggestions in a little bit more detail. If you are just starting, if you're just picking up the T-7 Mini-Chaingun, I suggest unlocking extended magazines as your very first attachment. Extended magazines only gives you benefits, it does not give you downsides. And what's more important is that the benefit of extended magazines is a bridge that helps circumvent the weapon's pitfalls. So unlike your T9 Carve S or your T32 Bull, both of which have access to extended magazines, the downside of those weapons isn't that they lack ammo. They're already accurate, they already have scopes, they already have ammo types and barrel attachments. To those weapons, extended magazines is basically a bonus for anyone who doesn't feel like they need to run a forward grip. But when you look at the MCG, it isn't accurate, meaning many miss shots. It has a spin-up time, meaning that bursting the weapon and conserving ammo is troublesome. It has a very high rate of fire, meaning that you're likely going to waste ammo on corpses and suppression. And it has a very long reload. Because of all those factors, you almost need extended mags to address the weapon's grievances. Or you can make those downsides maybe a bit worse and reap the rewards of increased damage output through the Ballistic Refire trigger. That said, if you are the kind of guy who likes to run in and kill as many people as possible before dropping dead, then the Ballistic Rapid Refire trigger is probably what you should be running. Not having 200 rounds in the magazine is painful, no matter how you look at it, but for running and gunning, a Ballistic Refire MCG is much more competitive than the alternatives. And lastly, I can't suggest running a laser sight. It's not even that it's a bad attachment, we just talked about this earlier, but it's just that the benefits of running a laser sight is that it gives you accuracy and maybe some mobility in close quarters. But close quarters kill potential is already the realm of the Ballistic Refire trigger, and that benefit extends well on into the mid-ranges. So by running a laser sight, you're basically setting yourself up for a disadvantage. If the laser sight lowered your HIPFIRE's maximum cone of fire, then it would be worth using, as the mobility you'd gain from not having to ADS would be well worth it in many situations. But it doesn't. It only makes your HIPFIRE cone of fire start smaller, and a smaller starting cone of fire is of very little use on a weapon with a spin-up time meant for sustained fire. So again, unlock extended magazines on this weapon first. Get a feel for it, enjoy it, then if you're feeling frisky, branch out to the Rapid Refire trigger and see how it works for you. That said, the MCG can be used for basically two different playstyles: a more aggressive breach and clear style approach, or a slower paced support style that relies on allies to supplement your weaknesses. Generally speaking, Ballistic Refire is better for aggression, while extended magazines is more suited toward a support role. For a more aggressive player, I would also advise sticking with a nanite mesh generator or adrenaline shield. Support players may benefit more from a resist shield if you've got medics on standby, or if you're playing at the ranges where you'll be sitting in your top end health pool for the majority of the time. As far as weapon-specific strategy goes, aim at the chest and aim down sights when possible. Remember that headshots only give you a 1.5 times damage multiplier, which is low. Because of that, you want to focus on not missing any bullets rather than on landing skillful shots. Aiming at the chest means you have a bigger target to hit, and then you just let the rate of fire do its thing. Another habit to get into the mindset of is to pull the trigger as soon as you see an enemy. I'm talking about the moment you notice an enemy is nearby. Oftentimes, just by habit of using other weapons, we aim down sights, we get a beat on the target, and then we open fire. With the Mini-Chaingun, this isn't the way that you want to do things. You want to get your weapon up to max speed as quickly as possible, which means learning the reaction of pulling the trigger as soon as you identify a threat. Then you can acquire your target midstream. Because remember that the ADS cone of fire does not expand, and it doesn't care if you started hip firing first. It's always the same, so there's no need to wait to be accurate, and there's no need to even burst your shots. So again, see the enemy, pull the trigger, then acquire. Along those same lines, pre-fire your weapon when you anticipate a fight. If you know that an enemy is around the corner and you're hiding behind cover, you can pull the trigger to get the engine started, then you turn the corner when the minigun is already firing at full speed. The most difficult part of using this weapon is learning to avoid the spin-up disadvantage, so you want to do it whenever you can. As a word of caution, especially if you're using the Ballistic Refire attachment, try not to move around so much as a minigunner, especially if you're holding down a point or otherwise playing defensively. I can't tell you how many times I've backed up just slightly or maybe strafed a little bit left and right, just out of habit, and I almost instantly mow down an ally because I clipped inside of him. It happens and it's hilarious when it does, but try not to move around unnecessarily. On the other side of that coin though, stop running in front of me. In fact, if you see a mini-chain gun letting loose, don't go anywhere near the guy. Just let them do their thing until they run out of ammo, or try to get within their line of sight before you cross over, so that way at least they know that there is an ally that they need to shoot around. Too often, players run right in front of the barrel, and especially if you're aiming down sights, you just don't have the field of view to react quickly enough. And if that's the case, if you crossed over right in front of the barrel, then that's kind of your fault. Overall, I think that the T-7 Mini-Chaingun is a lot better now than it used to be. You have a very specific range in which it's effective, making it a powerful alternative to LMGs in certain situations. You can play support by deterring enemies with an unyielding spray of bullets, or you can get up close and personal with the Ballistic Rapid Refire trigger. The weapon is a lot of fun to use. It has a satisfying sound, it's very different than your run-of-the-mill weaponry, and it's also not hard to control, meaning that knowing how to aim well is not as important. Beginners can pick up this weapon, they can relegate themselves to more of a support role, and they can still be successful with the weapon's use. As a player grows into the weapon, as they become more comfortable with it, they can learn to move better, they can learn to predict enemy movements, which will allow them to circumvent the weapon's downsides, and you can find yourself in those situations where you can wipe out an entire room of enemies. I still think that the weapon could use a slight buff to either the magazine size or reload speed, and something should definitely be done about the laser sight attachment to make it more viable, but I also don't view these things as an absolute necessity to make the weapon worth using. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and if you've used this weapon in the past or if you've picked it up recently, let me know how you feel about it. Do you still think that the weapon needs some tweaking, or do you think that it's in a good place right now? Thanks very much, folks. We're all signing off.